welcome to Ancient Awakening with Castalia. I am Castalia, your host, and for those of you who don't know me, I do work over on the Realm of Inspiration and ElfianRealm.com to help inspire the collective all in their ascension journey. I work to help heal and guide through my channeled readings and coaching sessions. I am a certified card reader, channeler, and crystal Reiki master, and I am also certified in Greek mythology and ancient Greek gods and goddesses. And what better way to combine both of my passions than to uncover the spiritual metaphors hidden in those myths? The teachings and guidelines already are there before us. They are just hidden beneath the surface of stories full of tragedy, heartbreak, war, death, love, and more. The time for metaphors is done, so let's find clarity together through a transformative journey that is Ancient Awakening. Before Apollo and Artemis, there were Helios and Selene, the titans who carried the sun and the moon across the sky. But they weren't just celestial drivers, they were metaphors for the creative force itself. Helios, the radiant blaze of conscious creation. Selene, the quiet pull of intuitive dreaming. Together, they remind us that creativity and creation is both fire and flow. This week's episode is Helios and Selene, the sun and the moon, as creation and creative archetypes. But before we dive into this episode, let us discuss the prompts from last week's episode to set the tone for what ancient wisdom today will bring. So, the first prompt from last week is, what do I fear most about death, and where does that fear live in me? So last week I mentioned, let's try and find a body system or a chakra that might match that. Where is it living? For me, fear lives in my heart chakra whenever I feel fear, and also in my root chakra whenever I feel fear, and in my earth star chakra. I feel like really my earth star chakra the most, because anytime I feel intense fear, anxiety, I grip my earth star. I try to ground myself. But this is specifically about the fear about death. And I have spent about the last 10 years of my life, especially by the time that this episode comes out, I think almost exactly when this episode comes out, going through the understanding of grief and death. When I was 11, in the fall of my 6th grade year of junior high, my grandfather, my maternal grandfather, passed away, and I witnessed grief from my mother and my brother. I knew him for a short while, but it affected me really deeply, and I think it was also just empathically feeling everyone else in my family's grief about it. It wasn't until I was 13 that I was able to come to Greece and see his grave. And then now I live, relatively close to his grave, so his presence is there. In my life, it's always in my life, and he comes through when I do meditations as like an ancestral representative. Sometimes when I do readings with clients, I can feel his presence around. When I do channelings and card readings, the soul lives on, and through understanding that grieving process and understanding his death, and I think the first time that I had a very intense, vivid dream about him, and he was speaking more in the present moment, I realized, death isn't the end, and that to me, and I refer to that as like one of the awakening anniversaries, especially for a lot of people in my life, a lot of family. It was, it changed a lot of things, and he was such a kind-hearted soul, and when I would have very intense dreams where he was very clearly guiding me, or I would ask sometimes, always around his death anniversary, I would ask something. I would ask him to show me something, if I'm on the right path about something or not. And you know, he really, really his presence around me when he departed, the presence of his soul, made me understand that death isn't the end. So I don't really have fear about death. I have done a certain type of, and I want to learn maybe how to do this and guide people in this. So, you know, check out the realm of inspiration for a little bit more about that. But I've done some guided things when it comes to the ancestry and ancestors, but I've done a sort of past life regression before with a healer where I actually went into the ancestry of my lifetime and this lifetime and saw what ancestors are affecting me and what cycles. And that put into perspective a lot of things for me when it comes to death, that we still live on in other ways. And you know, you can feel like the fear of being forgotten. I think my main goal is to just make a little corner of the world a little bit better than how I found it, and that's it. So, but yeah, I don't really, it's more the grieving process, which I want to do an episode of the grieving process in myth, because there is like loss in myth too. Yeah, I think, you know, I don't like saying these things like, oh, am I above people to say that I don't have a fear about death, but I don't. I understand it's not the end, it's like a graduation, and that's how my mom explained it to me when I was younger, and I think it was as she was processing it as well. When she was telling me like, no, it's okay, like it's a graduation, and then I started doing spirit work, and his presence was there, and there are some times where I feel it so strongly. Like right now, if anyone's going through grief, I would just say, I received a message from a medium that like whenever you think about or talk about him, his presence is there. Time doesn't exist in the spirit in the same way it does in the physical. So like, you know, when you think about him, or you think about a departed loved one, or you see something that reminds you of them, that their presence is there and their presence is with you, and they're supporting you. And when I read tarot, one of my favorite cards to read for myself is my outside influences card, because I always in my mind interpret it as messages from my ancestors and from him. So that fear of death doesn't live in me. I don't have a fear of death. I want to live. I know I have things that I'm meant to accomplish, but also I feel like I try, and the best thing to do, and the Greek gods and goddesses, come on, they should have been doing this, is that every action that you take and every action that you make is something that if you were to not wake up the next morning, you would feel like you lived a fulfilling life. One of the most remarkably bizarre things about my grandfather's death was a few months leading up to his death, or a few weeks as well, he was watching videos and things of his life, and he was like, I really lived a good life, and he was really spending that time reminiscing on his life and feeling like he really did accomplish things, and he passed very peacefully. So feeling joy in every action that you take, that's really important, to not do things that are causing harm to other people. Because a lot of the people who I know who are very afraid of death are the people who have caused a lot of harm. And what they're afraid of is the karma that's going to happen. So clear your karma while you're alive. Number 2, what emotional attachments keep me rooted in the land of the living? My family. And my friends, I would say, but I would also think it'd be like so fun to come from the ancestry and, or as a spirit guide, and be like nudging at them too. But I also feel like what keeps me attached is the potential for future. You know, to have a future life, to have a husband, a family, kids, and watching my little cousins grow up. I think that's those things, life keeps me attached in the world of the living, but not material possessions. I have no problem getting rid of things, but it's connections with people that I know, like this, who knows if I'll have another lifetime with them, and it's not going to be like this, like, yeah, reincarnation is the thing, but you also only live once as this current incarnation, so you might as well make the most of it. Number 3 was my ego resists the idea of life beyond the body. This is not something I struggle with as much anymore. I used to a lot. My ego was hyper vigilant, hyper survival mode, and sometimes I have this, but I have hypervigilance in like scenarios where I should have hypervigilance, like if I'm going out dancing with friends and it's like we're in a big group setting where there are a bunch of people and a bunch of tourists and a bunch of things, like I'm hypervigilant, and I'm always alert, and I'm always the one who's alert and paying attention to everything going on, and sometimes I feel bad if I'm not being hypervigilant, because I take that upon myself to be that way. But now it's within reason. It used to be like where I was even afraid of windows. Like I was very scared of things as a child, which has to do with paranoia and blah, blah, blah backstory stuff of my life. But I think how I can offer some insight, how I kind of train the ego is just to, anytime it freaks out, I do something to live in the moment, to be in the present moment awareness. I try to be in the moment. I try to retrain my brain to be in the present moment. I think the only times where I feel it so heavily, concern is honestly on planes. I do. But I'm going to be honest, like I grew up in the States and now I'm in Greece. And I don't feel, fears about death concerns. I don't feel like I need to be as hypervigilant. I don't feel as paranoid in Greece. Maybe it's just my soul kind of like relaxing. I don't know what it is. Maybe it also could be, 5 years of trying to train the ego and now it's like sticking, and it's sticking now that I'm here. But I also think environment is huge for the ego. If the ego can pick things from the environment to freak out about, it's gonna freak out about it. But if it really can't pull anything, then it's not gonna freak out. I also try to do a lot of sound detoxes as best as I can. So the ego doesn't have little earworms to pull and try and the overthinking mess. I really went through the process of retraining my brain for 5 years. So, but I'd be interested to your other perspectives on that. Number 4, if I could speak to each head of Cerberus, what would I say? If I would speak to the past head and the head of the like kind of emotional body, I would say that it's okay, because I'm going to live each day trying to make a lasting impact on the people that I would leave behind, and I would be ready to accept whatever the creator wants for me. If I were to speak to the present and more so the physical body head, I would say I love my body, and it took me a really long time to love and accept my body. I think there was a time in my life where I would have willingly accepted death because I didn't feel comfortable in my own skin. And I think the best thing was that I learned how to love the body that I was given. I learned to accept all my natural characteristics, and I learned to love myself. And I also think a part of that was also removing myself from environments where I was constantly being judged for being different, and find environments where my differences are accepted as well. So it's okay, and I'm trying to live in the present moment, so I will accept what comes best I can, even though it can be a struggle sometimes. We are humans. If I were to speak to the future head and more like the mental body head, I would say like we gotta stop overthinking, we gotta let it go. Also with the past head, we gotta let it go. Just be like, I gotta let it go, can you help me let it go? Like that's what I would ask. Like if I was faced with this like omnipotent being of the past, present, and future that I could ask for its help in anything, I'd be like, can you help me let go of the things from the past that are dictating my ability to prepare for the future of my dreams? Can we do this? We can try, and we can try through uncovering and bringing clarity to things. Number 5, final prompt. What would it mean to die before I die and awaken beyond fear? So I've kind of experienced this with a lot of fears. Obviously the one that I still work on is really making sure the dog phobia thing is gone, because I'm not going to be living like that, and I really don't want someone to have control over me, because that was not a fear of my own choosing. I was trained like a dog to be afraid of dogs. I think I've said this before, and it is a very interesting thing. Very interesting, ironic phenomenon that occurred in my real life. I think that there are maybe some like anxieties I have that if I were to like let those die, like it would mean to let fear die and live on the other side of fear. I have some examples of people in my life who, especially my mother, who very much has gone through the process of overcoming fear. I mean, mind over matter for sure. It's too, you know, if you were to awaken on the other side of fear, it'd just be a lot of peace, a lot of calming peace, a lot of, you know, in some ways, if I'm gonna think about it, when I have moments where I'm really like not feeling afraid, would be honestly when I'm just like I'm walking in the street and I'm not looking over my shoulder and I'm just like listening to music in my own world, and then I see a little stray cat and I go play with the cat, and then I like go meet friends and I'm not thinking of like all the possible things that could go wrong. That's like very peaceful. That's like everything I ever wanted. As a child, I used to sit in the trees and cry about wanting a normal life, which is a very sad thing to say out loud. But in a way, I was crying to the earth and I was crying to the heavens and I was asking for help. And my idea of normal was a life without fear. So that's what I would be living, whatever I thought that was. But actually, when I realized that now it's actually a little bit more common to be living with fear than without fear. But for me, at that age, I wanted to live without fear. So yeah, that's kind of my best summary. My response to these. So now, to the episode itself, we are getting to understand who Helios and Selene are. So little fact, Greek language fact. Helios is the sun, and in Greek you say sun is Helios. There is a version of saying the moon, like the full moon, that has the root of Selene in it, but in Greek it's actually Fengari. In Greek, so it's not Selene, but there also is like some other, like you can also refer to the moon with words that have the root of Selene in it. So I don't know why that is, if we're just, if the language is like, well, Helios is nice, but like we can also call the moon something else. I don't know why that is, but little fun fact there. So Helios was the sun Titan. He was the son of Hyperion and Thea, brother to Selene and Eos. He drove, in mythology, a golden chariot across the sky each day. He saw everything and was often called the all-seeing eye. My sun tapestry has the eyes closed. So kind of good it's covered because it's not a good representation of Helios. The all-seeing eye of the gods. Later merged with Apollo, but originally distinct. So in myth, like for a while they're like distinct, and then eventually it's like Apollo takes all of the qualities of Helios and just like it becomes one thing. But then there is reference to Helios. I think that just has to do with like the fact that over time the Titans became less and less relevant, so they forgot. And it's like, oh, it makes sense if now Apollo is taking on this role after the Titanmancy that he's just gonna be everything. But Helios himself was the sun, and Apollo is a little bit different. And the symbolism of Helios is conscious creation, divine will, illumination, and masculine energy, the divine masculine, visibility and truth. So he really is the metaphor of the sun. And Selene is the metaphor of the moon titaness, sister to Helios and Eos, daughter of Hyperion and Thea, rides a silver chariot across the night sky, associated with mystery, dreams, and emotional tides. She had a little romantic story. So there was a mortal she visits in eternal sleep. So she is also referred to as the lover of Endymion. She symbolizes intuitive creativity, emotional depth, the divine feminine energy, reflection, and cycles. So I picked 3 summaries of myths where Helios, 3 for him, Selene, 3 for her, where it shows the metaphor that we are uncovering. So Helios as the sun as conscious creation. So the first myth that this kind of shows is the sacred cattle. So creation must be respected. And this myth, it is in the Odyssey, where Odysseus's crew slaughters Helios's sacred cattle despite warnings. Helios threatens to stop shining unless justice is served. Zeus punishes the crew with a deadly storm. The spiritual metaphor here is that Helios's cattle symbolizes divine creative energy, sacred, cyclical, and not to be consumed recklessly. Creativity must be honored, not exploited. To misuse the gifts of the sun is to invite spiritual drought. To misuse creation, manifestation, and the divine masculine energy is to cause a spiritual drought. If you are to use higher spiritual gifts for negative purposes, that is the ego. And what it'll do is it's going to empower the ego, but it will deflate the soul. And that means that your soul is not going to be able to progress in the way that it is meant to. So the second myth is Phaethon's ride, the danger of unprepared creation. Phaethon, Helios' son, begs to drive the chariot to prove his divine lineage. Helios reluctantly agrees, but his son loses control, scorching the earth and causing chaos. Zeus strikes him down to save the world. The danger of unprepared creation. The spiritual metaphor here is this story warns of misaligned creative power. When ego drives creation without wisdom, Helios represents the responsibility of illumination, to shine with purpose, not pride. Creation without grounding burns. The sun must rise with intention. And this is especially prevalent when it comes to manifestation. There is a lot going on with manifestation, energy work, law of attraction, all of these things kind of in general fall, anything with creation falls under Helios. So that being said, when you start your spiritual journey, there is a lot of misinformation left and right. The sun clears miscommunication. Left and right miscommunication. I can't tell you how many times with clients and even friends I get questions about things like, wait, I can manifest someone to do whatever I want, right? No, you cannot. No, you cannot. Absolutely not. That infringes on free will entirely on free will. Where I also I've witnessed one law of attraction, attracting things with harm to none. Do not infringe on free will, please. That is literally that causes so much chaos. This also has to do with anything to do spiritually. If you are unprepared, if you are unprotected, if you don't take time to understand what's going on, if you're going with the ignorance is bliss mindset, it can cause a lot of damage. So that still happens. And also there is a little bit of that with the story of Icarus, which I do have in the cup at some point. So we will do an episode of Icarus because there is a little bit of that as well. But that was a divine intervention needed to correct the problems that were being caused by some ego, the ego of Helios' son, wanting to prove something. And here's the thing, the ego wants to prove that it knows things. It wants to prove. The ego wants to scream and yell and say things and wants to prove itself. When it comes to anything working with higher light energy, high vibrations, spirituality, light work, healing, mediumship, whatever it is, whatever you are doing it for the soul, not the ego. So if you feel like you have to prove it and you have to constantly fight with people to prove it, that might be the ego. And maybe you might want to reflect on what exactly you're being guided to do. Because the ego wants to control and it's going to go in unprepared and just create a mess. So it's very important, and I really do like that myth, and I'd love to do a full episode on like just Helios' lineage in general, and the metaphors there, and the metaphors of the sun too, because there's a lot there, and it really is very prevalent to what's going on right now in regards to awakening. So the third and final myth for Helios is Helios as the divine witness, the light that sees all. Helios is often involved as a witness to oaths and crimes because he sees everything from the sky. In the myth of Aphrodite and Ares, Helios reveals their secret affair to Hephaestus. Their story, there's metaphors there. Love and war. So the metaphor here is that Helios embodies truth and visibility. He is the light that exposes, the clarity that reveals, and in creative terms, he is the voice that cannot lie, and in creation manifestation as well. The sun does not hide. It shines truth into the shadows. That's the representation. The warrior frequency, the frequency of truth, the communicator essence, the sun. I've always had a deep fascination and connection to the sun, and it's very much the embodiment and representation of the truth, and that's what Helios represents, is sometimes even brutally honest truth. Selene is a little bit different. Selene, the moon, as intuitive, creativity and creation. So the myth of Selene and her lover, Endymion, dream as divine creation. Selene falls in love with the mortal Endymion, who sleeps eternally. She visits him nightly, and their union births 50 daughters, symbolic of lunar cycles. This is what I meant in one episode when I said, in regards to Zeus, technically you can interpret the metaphors being creation, and he's creating more things, because logistically it doesn't make sense, like, to take it at face value. And I honestly, a lot of times, because I have basically been studying myths since I was 2 years old, when I was like read the myths as a child, and I was watching the Odyssey from a very young age as well. It probably shouldn't have been, but myths, and also like Hercules and Greek history, and my mom did a very good job on educating me about my ancestors. But I always found it very interesting when people took, in general, the myths at face value. Obviously, there is a metaphor. It's a metaphor. Like, yes, how is it possible that they could come up with all of this stuff? But like, it's a metaphor. Like, when I think about, sometimes when I try and write things and I'm trying to, like, even to kids, I say it as a metaphor. I try to come up with some metaphor that they understand. It's very clearly a metaphor. And I also find it very funny when people are like, you're doing like light working things and you talk about God and Jesus and the archangels, but why are you doing something with myths? And also growing up Greek in America, it's like, do you worship Zeus? Which also, no, please don't say that to any Greek person ever, please. It's actually genuinely so disrespectful. But hearing these things, being like, okay, it's obviously metaphors. Every myth from every culture has metaphors. They are stories, they are teachings. But it's so that, like, the Greeks and other cultures, when other countries come to invade, Greece did experience this with, obviously, the genocide and Turkey becoming Turkey, that other people try to get rid of, scriptures and, things that hold meaning, and libraries and things like this, and wisdom and knowledge. But if it's hidden in some like silly myth that doesn't make really much sense, and it's like maybe a religious thing, but yeah, is it? And it can be kept alive. Because if it's also by word of mouth, and it's just, these are stories, these are metaphors, and then that's when they were probably explaining to their children and people around them, this is what it means. But if you're to read it like this, the moon comes down to earth and mates with a mortal and creates 50 children, like, what could that possibly mean? It's also why in a lot of the myths, like they say, this is explaining this, myths are explaining why things. So in general, we understand that myths are explaining why. But it's also that the metaphors, the spiritual metaphors hidden inside of them, which are very clear, it's so that if other civilizations tried to come and invade, which happened in Greece, and tried to erase the history and the knowledge, that it would live on and that the people would be able to keep the wisdom. And that's why eventually I'm going to dive into I'm going to try and like understand and study all myths so that eventually I can dive into all of them. Like Egyptian mythology also has a lot of things, Norse mythology, dive into it because there is so much hidden wisdom, and it was hidden for a purpose so that it wouldn't be taken away. So this is a very important thing. And when it comes to, you know, with the sun and the moon, it's they use their intuition to create something with creativity that would be full of wisdom that would outlive them. And that is quite literally the balance of the divine masculine and feminine and the sun and the moon. So that's why it's important to talk about in this episode and why I felt I need to mention it. Typically, I have a script with these episodes, but I also let my intuition guide me because that's what we're doing. So the metaphor here is Selene creates through dream, rhythm, emotional depth. Her love is quiet, eternal, and fertile. She teaches that creation can be soft, slow, and sacred in regards to the birth of her the lunar cycles. So not all creation is loud. Some is born in silence beneath the moon. So the second myth that shows Selene's spiritual metaphors is Selene's banishment, the pain of separation from creative flow. Jealous Eos tricks Zeus into banishing Selene from Helios. Selene is cast into the cosmos, separated from her beloved brother, and mourns from afar. This myth reflects the emotional cost of creative disconnection. Selene's longing shows how creativity suffers when the soul is divided, when intuition is exiled from expression. The moon weeps when it cannot dance with the sun. So that's the myth of explaining the sun and the moon. Every culture, and I remember in school like finding it, oh wow, it's very interesting that this culture and this culture and this culture, all of them, in like literature class, learning that they all have a myth that explains that often that the sun and the moon were siblings or related and separated. So with this, I will also do an actual full episode about the divine masculine and feminine, and kind of that balance when it comes to Apollo and Artemis, because they do show it a little bit better, a little bit differently, because it's a little bit different. They have more of like the yin-yang divine masculine and feminine because they have aspects of the other within each other, but Helios and Selene are very much like what they are, and they're not really showing characteristics of the other. But this is why it's very important. We must balance our divine masculine and feminine energy to experience wholeness as a soul. And this can be where there is like a lot of misinterpretations. And there's one Reiki healer that I love the way she words it when she does healings online. When she says like your divine feminine energy, whether or not you are physically masculine or feminine, you have divine feminine energy, and vice versa, which is true. It is not the way that we interpret it as like male or female. It is a little bit different, and we have both energies, and it's balancing them within us that is important. And when we are separated from parts of ourselves, when we have a disconnect, when we're not acknowledging parts of ourselves, we are in pain. So that's kind of also another aspect of what that represents. And the third and final myth in regards to Selene is Selene and Pan, wild inspiration and lunar ecstasy. Pan, the wild god of nature, falls in love with Selene and her gifts and gifts her a shining fleece to win her affection. Their union is brief and ecstatic. Selene's encounter with Pan represents spontaneous inspiration, the wild muse that visits in flashes. She reminds us that creativity isn't always planned. Sometimes it's primal. The moon receives what the wild heart offers and turns it into light. What I love when you actually think of when all of the gods in Greek mythology are procreating like crazy with each other is it is a metaphor of just creation and different things coming together. That's truly what it is. So what happens if love and war get together? What happens if the wild and the calm moon come together? What does that create? What could spur from that? It's very clearly metaphors. When it comes to creativity, and how we can tap into our creativity, we need to allow space for inspiration to flow. I do quite love, as I do things with the frequency of inspiration, Pan as a representation of spontaneous inspiration, because he's a very spontaneous and random character in mythology. And I also, because my namesake is in Delphi, so it's the fountain also of inspiration. The frequency of inspiration is very strong there, and actually the water that feeds into that fountain starts from Mount Parnassus, and Mount Parnassus is also considered to be where Pan dwelled. So it's also called the Cave of Pan is within Mount Parnassus, which that is my literal dream. I go to Delphi a lot, but I never go up to Mount Parnassus into the Cave of Pan, and I really want to, because that's where that spring starts. And then has been interpreted as being associated with inspiration and creativity and poetry. So I can very clearly see, especially like at nighttime, I can feel it a little bit more. So Selene, the moon, even just being around the fountain in general, not necessarily up by the spring, you can sense it, you can feel it, you can feel something magical occurring energetically, and it's powerful even like from below. I couldn't even imagine what it would be like up there in the cave, and there is energy there because it's nature, and nature carries a lot of energy. So also Pan being representation of nature, and what happens when we blend our creative intuition with nature. So next, I just want to kind of give a brief kind of summary of things. Some things I uncovered. So when it comes to Helios, the energy that he has is active and radiant. In regards to creation, he represents the bold expression of creation, and he represents clarity that comes in the daytime. He is associated with the solar plexus and the throat chakra. And the shadow of Helios is burnout and ego, so obviously that is the reversed aspect of things. Some of Helios's myths, he does have some ego, and also one of the myths, his son had to be burnt out to save the earth, but also spiritual burnout is something that can kind of cause us to be in toxic masculine energy when we are experiencing spiritual burnout. So that's the negative aspect of that. For Selene, her energy is receptive and reflective. In regards to creation, she represents subtle inspiration. She also represents the mystery that comes at night, that is clarified then by day, and then it keeps going round and round and round again. Her chakras are the third eye and sacral chakra associations, and her shadow is obscurity and stagnation. So in regards to your divine femininity, it is just like wandering obscurely and with no direction. Typically the moon is it's pretty precise. And stagnation, not moving forward, that is something that can also cause like spiritual sloth too, when you get stuck in stagnation. So manifestation and creativity need both the fire to act and the silence to receive. Helios is the part of us that shows up, creates boldly, and seeks recognition. Selene is the part of us that dreams and creates from the shadows, that can ascend from the shadows. Together they form the creative cycle, like inhale and exhale, waxing and waning, sunrise and sunset. To create is to ride both chariots, one through fire and one through mist. So Helios and Selene are not just celestial bodies, they are archetypes of the creative soul. Helios teaches us to rise, to shine, to speak our truth boldly into the world. Selene reminds us to retreat, to reflect, to create from the quiet depths of intuition. One blazes, one glows. Together they form the sacred rhythm of creation. We are not meant to burn endlessly, nor to hide forever. We are meant to cycle. We are meant to express and to receive, to act and dream. The sun and the moon do not compete. They collaborate. And so must we, with our inner light within, and with all aspects of who we are, and with other people. So now, as you sit with an aspect of the sun and moon within you, your divine feminine and your divine masculine, your manifestation and your intuition, creation, creativity, let's turn inward to reflect and to remember the rhythm of our souls with affirmations. So it is time for the affirmations as this episode is coming to an end. So firstly, I honor both the fire of action and the flow of intuition. My creativity is sacred and cyclical and limitless. I shine like Helios and dream like Selene. I trust the rhythm of my soul's expression. Creation is not a performance, it's a revelation. And that's a really big lesson in the myths. That being affirmed, let's see what the journal prompts for this week will be. So, journal prompts for awakening the creator and manifester and intuitive within. Firstly, what do I feel, when do I feel most like Helios? Bold, expressive, seen. 2, when do I feel most like Selene? Quiet, intuitive, hidden. 3, do I fear the spotlight of creation or the silence of gestation more? And why? 4, what does my creative rhythm look like, and when and where is it out of balance? And 5, if I could speak to Helios and Selene, if I could speak to the sun and the moon, which technically you can. You can go out in the day and talk to the sun, go out at night, talk to the moon. What would they teach me about my soul's expression? So it's really, they represent a lot of expression. And that being said, when it comes to expression, we must figure out how to express ourselves authentically and compassionately. And I think that the myths do a fabulous job of expressing authenticity in a very metaphorical and creative and kind of like nice and dumbed down way for us to understand. So let's see what next week we will uncover to make it a little bit more complicated, but actually bring a lot of clarity to it. Bring the sun and the moon for some clarity to us. Let's see what we got for next week. Oh, this is fun. So not at all related. I was kind of like, will I pull Icarus? Will I pull Apollo? Will I pull Artemis? No, kind of not related to this at all. And I have it written as like special episode because it's not necessarily a myth. But the Eleusinian mysteries, those were mentioned in last week's episode. So next week we're going to talk about the Eleusinian mysteries. So it's not necessarily a metaphor in the myth. It's more so what the metaphors of the myths resulted in creating actually and factually in ancient Greek history. So that being said, I will see you next week so we can uncover more wisdom from the ancient ones left before us. And I will see you all then. Hopefully the sun and the moon can help guide you in awakening your ancient wisdom from within.